Have you ever wondered why God's name doesn't appear even once in the Book of Esther? Get ready for a revelation that will shake your understanding of the Bible. In this video, I'll share hidden secrets that unravel this intriguing mystery and can completely transform your spiritual life. Interested? Then comment now, "I receive the blessings that God is giving me now." That's right, just comment, "I receive the blessings that God is giving me now." When I see your comment, I'll give it the little heart, because I know you'll achieve incredible results soon. Great! Now that you've commented, let's dive into this fascinating journey through the Book of Esther and discover truths that few know. Get ready for an experience that will revolutionize your faith. Imagine opening a book of the Bible and not finding God's name anywhere. It seems impossible, doesn't it? But that's exactly what happens in the Book of Esther. This notable absence has intrigued scholars, theologians, and ordinary readers for centuries. It's as if God had simply disappeared from the pages of this fascinating book. But is he really not there? The Book of Esther stands out in the Bible not only for the absence of God's name but also for not mentioning common religious practices such as prayer, sacrifices, or worship. It's as if we were reading a purely secular story. However, this apparent absence hides a profound truth that many overlook. To understand this enigma, we first need to dive into the unique historical context of the book. Esther takes place during the Babylonian exile, a period when the Jewish people were dispersed and living under foreign rule. It was a time of identity and faith crisis. Many Jews had assimilated into Persian culture, and the connection with God seemed distant. In this scenario, the absence of God's name in the Book of Esther perfectly reflects the reality experienced by the Jews at that time. They felt abandoned, forgotten by God. But, as we'll see, this apparent absence is actually a powerful message about God's faithfulness even when we don't see or feel Him. The question we should ask ourselves is God really absent just because His name isn't mentioned? Or is He working in such subtle and profound ways that we need a new perspective to perceive Him? This is the key to unraveling the mystery of the Book of Esther. Throughout this video, we'll explore how this apparent absence of God is actually a powerful demonstration of His constant presence and unfailing care. Get ready to see the Book of Esther with new eyes and discover truths that can transform your understanding of how God acts in your own life. Imagine a theater director who never appears on stage, but whose vision and direction shape every aspect of the play. This is how God acts in the Book of Esther. His presence, although not explicitly mentioned, is felt in every twist of the story. It's as if God were behind the scenes, orchestrating events with divine precision. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Book of Esther is how it demonstrates divine providence in action. Providence is the way God cares for His creation and guides events to fulfill His purposes. In Esther's case, we see a series of coincidences that, when examined closely, reveal God's hand working behind the scenes. Think, for example, of how Esther, a young orphan Jewish girl, ends up becoming queen of Persia. Or how Mordecai discovers a conspiracy against the king at the exact moment. These are not mere chances, but examples of how God was strategically positioning His people for a greater purpose. The absence of God's name in the Book of Esther teaches us a powerful lesson. Sometimes, God acts in ways we cannot immediately see or understand. It's a reminder that true faith doesn't depend on spectacular manifestations, but on trust in a God who is always present, even when He seems absent. This hidden presence of God in the Book of Esther challenges us to look beyond the obvious in our own lives. How many times do we fail to recognize God's hand acting because we're looking for grand signs? The Book of Esther invites us to develop a more attentive eye, to perceive God in small coincidences and seemingly insignificant moments. As we understand the power of God's hidden presence in Esther, we are challenged to live with a deeper and more mature faith. A faith that trusts in God's goodness and plan, even when we cannot fully see or understand. This is the faith that moves mountains and transforms lives. The Book of Esther is like a divine puzzle, full of symbols and parallels that, when put together, reveal a surprising image of God's plan. One of the most fascinating parallels is how Esther can be seen as a type or prefiguration of Christ. Just as Esther risked her life to save her people, Jesus gave His life to save all of humanity. Notice how Esther goes through a period of preparation before presenting herself to the king, just as Jesus spent 30 years preparing for his ministry. Esther intercedes for her people before the king, just as Christ intercedes for us before the Father. These similarities are not coincidences, but divine clues planted centuries before Christ's coming. Another surprising parallel is found in the figure of Mordecai. His inspired leadership and refusal to bow before Haman echo the firmness of Daniel and his friends. Mordecai, like Joseph in Egypt, rises to a position of power in the foreign court, demonstrating how God can use his people to influence nations. The very name Esther is full of meaning. In Persian, it means star, while her Hebrew name, Hadassah, means myrtle, an aromatic plant used in celebrations. This symbolizes how she shone in a foreign environment, bringing joy and liberation to her people. Isn't it amazing how God uses even names to tell his story? The Feast of Purim, established at the end of the Book of Esther, also carries profound symbolism. This annual celebration of the Jews' deliverance prefigures in a way the Christian Easter, where we celebrate our deliverance from sin through Christ. Both feasts commemorate how God transformed a situation of imminent death into life and joy. As we discover these symbols and parallels, the Book of Esther becomes much more than a simple historical narrative. It reveals itself as a testimony to the consistency of God's character and plan throughout history. It invites us to look more deeply into our own story, seeking the golden threads of divine providence woven into our lives. God's silence in the Book of Esther is not a void, but a profound language that we need to learn to interpret. It's as if God were inviting us to tune our spiritual ears to hear his voice in a different tone. This divine silence is not absence, but a subtle and powerful presence that permeates the entire narrative. There are moments in life when God seems to be silent. Perhaps you've experienced this. Prayers that seem to go unanswered, difficult situations where God seems distant. The Book of Esther teaches us that these moments of apparent divine silence are actually opportunities for deep growth in our faith. When God is silent, we are challenged to trust him in a deeper way. It's as if he were telling us, "Trust me even when you can't see or hear me clearly." This is the kind of faith that moves mountains, the faith that perseveres even when everything seems to be against us. God's silence in Esther also teaches us about the importance of human action. Esther and Mordecai didn't remain passive waiting for a divine miracle. They acted with courage and wisdom, trusting that God was with them, even without hearing his audible voice. This challenges us to be proactive in our faith, acting according to God's will, even when we don't have all the answers. Learning to hear God's silence is a vital spiritual skill. It's in moments of silence that we often grow the most. It's when we learn to depend more on God, to seek his will more intensely, and to develop a deeper intimacy with him. God's silence is not abandonment, but an invitation to deeper communion. The Book of Esther challenges us to see God's silence not as a problem, but as an opportunity. An opportunity to grow in faith, to act with courage, and to trust in God's perfect plan, even when we can't see it clearly. When we learn the language of divine silence, we discover that God is always speaking, always acting, always present, even in the most unlikely moments. The Book of Esther, although written thousands of years ago, contains revolutionary lessons that are incredibly relevant to us today. One of the most powerful lessons is how to live with faith in difficult times. Esther and her people faced a threat of genocide, a seemingly hopeless situation. However, they didn't succumb to despair. Their story teaches us that true faith doesn't depend on circumstances, but on unwavering trust in a God who is greater than any problem. Another crucial lesson is about discovering and fulfilling our divine purpose. Esther didn't become queen by chance. She was strategically positioned for such a time as this. Similarly, God has placed us exactly where we are for a reason. Your life, with all its unique challenges and opportunities, is a divine mission field. The question is, do you recognize this? The Book of Esther also teaches us about the power of community in faith. When Esther was preparing to risk her life by going before the king, she asked all the people to fast for her. This reminds us of the importance of mutual support and intercessory prayer. In an increasingly individualistic world, Esther calls us back to the strength of the faith community. A particularly relevant lesson for our days is about integrity in hostile environments. Mordecai refused to bow before Haman, maintaining his integrity even when it put him in danger. In a world where Christian values are often challenged, we are called to stand firm in our faith, even when it's not popular or convenient. Finally, Esther teaches us about the transformative power of a person who makes themselves available to God. A young orphan girl became God's instrument to save an entire nation. This challenges us to never underestimate the impact we can have when we completely surrender to God's purposes. Have you ever stopped to think about the impact your life can have when fully surrendered into God's hands? Just like Esther, you can be the instrument God uses to bring transformation in your family, community, or even your nation. The Book of Esther challenges us to live a bold and proactive faith. We are not called to be passive spectators of God's work, but active participants in His plan. Each of us has a unique role to play in the story God is writing. The question is, are we willing to take the necessary step of faith even when we don't clearly see the final outcome? Imagine yourself for a moment in Esther's place. An ordinary young woman, suddenly elevated to a position of influence, facing a decision that could cost her life but save her people. This is the challenge that the Book of Esther presents to us today, to be Esther in our own time and place. It's not just about admiring Esther's courage, but about embodying it in our own lives. Being Esther today means having the courage to act when God calls us, even when the cost seems too high. It might mean speaking truth in a hostile work environment, standing up for someone who is being wronged, or simply living your faith authentically in a world that often rejects Christian values. The question we must ask ourselves is, are we willing to step out of our comfort zone for what we believe in? The challenge of being Esther also involves recognizing the modern Persepolis where God has placed us. Maybe it's a classroom, an office, an online community, or a neighborhood. These are the places where God has strategically positioned us to make a difference. Like Esther, we may feel inadequate or unprepared, but it's exactly in these moments that God often chooses to act through us. Being Esther in our days also means being attentive to the needs around us. Esther could have ignored the danger her people faced, choosing the safety of her privileged position. Instead, she chose to get involved. Similarly, we are called not to close our eyes to the injustices and needs in our society, but to position ourselves as agents of change and hope. The Book of Esther teaches us that our actions today can impact future generations. Esther's courage not only saved her people at that moment but established a celebration, Purim, that continues to this day, thousands of years later. This reminds us that our choices and actions have the potential to create a lasting legacy. What kind of impact do you want to leave for future generations? Finally, being Esther today means living with the constant awareness that, even when we don't see or feel God, He is working behind the scenes of our lives. It's trusting that, just as God had a plan for Esther, He has a plan for each of us. The challenge is to live each day with this trust, ready to respond to God's call, whatever it may be. After exploring all these fascinating topics from the Book of Esther, I want to share with you a piece of advice that I believe comes directly from God's heart. Listen carefully, as I will repeat it so that it engraves deeply in your heart. Do not fear the silence, for it is in it that I often speak the loudest. Trust in me, even when you don't see me acting, for I am always working on your behalf. I repeat, do not fear the silence, for it is in it that I often speak the loudest. Trust in me, even when you don't see me acting, for I am always working on your behalf. This advice summarizes the essence of what we've learned from the Book of Esther. In the moments when God seems silent or absent, He is actually working powerfully behind the scenes of your life. Your faith and trust in these moments are precious to God and can lead to great victories. Remember, on my YouTube channel, I focus on 3 fundamental things: educating, inspiring, and elevating other people to draw closer to Jesus, our Lord and Savior. Use my channel as a valuable resource in your spiritual journey. If you've watched until here, please comment, "I stayed until the end." Just that. When I see your comment, I'll give it the little heart, because I know I've added value to your life. This motivates me even more to continue bringing you the best quality content. Now, a powerful video that is a sequel to this one is appearing on your screen. It's full of riches, secrets about God, biblical treasures, and much more that will accelerate your results in all areas. Click on that video right now. Don't miss this opportunity to continue your journey of spiritual discoveries. Do it now.